Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, verses 71 to 76, we will share today. Fundamentals of Rabubiyat laid down. There are some important points covered in today's presentation regarding rizq and its distribution aspects. And we'll go through some of those details. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is any query, question regarding this presentation or any of the previous presentations. Recap of verses 16, 60 to 70. Everything in the universe follows the laws of Allah. Man is created with the potentials of intellect and reasoning and can figure these out by employing his knowledge and insight. For example, if Allah's law of requital takes action immediately on any wrong committed by man, then there would be none left in the world. The time interval between a deed and its outcome is kept to provide respite for rectification and adopting the correct path. And for us as students of the Quran, this aspect is very important to understand, that whatever happens in the world, we should look at it that is it the end of the time of respite or is it still going to go further? Human beings at a basic level will always have differences, and these will create chaos and conflicts among them. These differences can be removed by using the guidance of the Quran, that is Allah's wahi. Momineen need to come to terms with this fact of the human psyche. The importance of the Quran can be understood through the simile of the functioning of honeybee. It instinctively, that is, it follows Allah's laws, goes about to suck nectar from flowers and fruits and then deposits this centrally for the use of all. In this arrangement, there is a sign for Momineen and of course for mankind. For Momineen is important because we are the ones who should relate it to the nizam of Rabubiyat so that we can then pass it on to others. Merely using honey is not enough. We should always, for example, if we go to the supermarket and look at some of the bottles of honey, whole of this process and these verses of the Quran should come to our mind to remind us. In the life cycle of each human being, i.e. childhood, adulthood, old age and death, there is a sign to understand the significance of the guidance of the Quran. An overview of today's presentation. Human beings have different abilities which help in the distribution of tasks in the world, but these are not meant to define their needs. As human beings, they have the same basic needs which need to be met by the system. It's a very important point, and we'll go through some of its details. The classes created by the man-made systems are unacceptable to Allah, and the Quran provides guidance on this aspect and invites us to opt for the system of Rabubiyat based on the permanent values. And what is unacceptable to Allah should also be unacceptable to Momineen. And that is the whole point of learning about the Quran and then practicing it in our real life. The Quran addresses Momineen to reflect on the signs in the outer world, their own family system, and within their own psyche, and come to this conclusion that the means of sustenance provided by Allah need to be distributed as per the guidance of Allah. Next point is, then the Quran illustrates this aspect by drawing our attention to the inequality and injustice of the man-devised systems in which people kept under subjugation cannot use their freedom of choice and intent and instead live a constrained life. And that's a big crime against the man-made system. If we can use our choice for something good in the world and we are prevented from using that choice, that means it is a crime against that system which is in place in the world. This is strictly against the respect and dignity of being human. Freedom means that no human being can impose his will and laws on another human being. Human beings should live life within the limits defined by the Quran, and that is where true freedom lies, because then it becomes consistent. If the same laws are applicable as were in the past and will be in the future, then that means there is a consistency in terms of having freedom in this world. Then there is no injustice done to anyone. Let us go to the first verse, 1671, which is commonly translated as Wallahu faddala ba'dakum ala ba'din fir rizqi famallazina fuddilu biraddi rizqihim ala ma malakat imanuhum فَهُمْ فِيهِ سَوَاءٌ أَفَبِنِعْمَةِ اللَّهِ يَجْحَدُونَ. I included this translation because I thought that if we look at the translation and then the meanings, then we will find there is a significant difference in terms of interpretation. Because merely reading at that translation, we cannot simply understand what the Quran is trying to tell us. Allah has bestowed His gifts of sustenance more freely on some of you than others. Those more favored are not going to throw back their gifts to those whom their right hands possess, to be equal in that respect. Will they then deny the favors of Allah? So there are clearly two parts of this verse which need to be put together. If the verse is read without keeping in mind the context of Rabubiyat, then it appears that the responsibility lies with Allah for the inequality we experience in the distribution of sustenance in the world. And that is an important point, because in the world of religion, this is the kind of talk we hear, that it is Allah who is responsible for everything in the human world. However, the question at the end makes us think that Allah is questioning us for the imbalance and inequality in risk under man-made systems. Because at the end, the verse is, "Afa bi-ni'matillahi yajhadun." This is because the slavery and subjugation noted earlier is due to the machinations of the human systems which the Quran has rejected. Because Quran has very clearly stated equal respect as a human being. Laqad karamna bani Adama. With this in mind, let us look at the meanings of this verse. Meanings of the verse. During the different stages of human life, the ability to work and earn vary. Children do not have it all, and in old people, it is reduced to a minimum. Then in our universal system of Rabubiyat, and even among your own family system, that is your family life, does this principle operate that the means of nourishment is available according to earnings, or this principle that sustenance is made available according to need? If this principle is operating that the sustenance of life is made available in proportion to earnings, then no child can remain alive, and you will also strangle the necks of the elderly. But this is not what you do. Instead, contrary to this, you act on the latter principle. But just reflect on this, that the principle on which you enact your family life, how come you ignore it in your general communal economic life? Because of this, those economic imbalances become created, as a result of which society turns into a living hell. It is a reality that there is a variation in the abilities of different individuals to earn rizq. That is, their earning ability varies from person to person. Continuing with the meanings of the verse 1671, one person possessed one kind of ability to a greater extent, another has another kind of ability. This is because in the world there are different kinds of tasks for which different kinds of abilities are needed. Those people who possess a great ability to earn rizq, they gather all their earnings and keep it all to themselves. Whereas whatever is in the excess of their needs is the right of those people whose needs are not met through their earnings. Hence, why do these people not return that extra wealth to those people who work under their direction and whose right this is in reality, so that in this way all people can become included equally in the economic conveniences bestowed by Allah? Those people who do not do this, they in fact deny that their greater ability has been bestowed on them as bounty, that is ni'mat from Allah. And that is again a very serious fault in human thinking. Even though their fundamental abilities and the means of rizq are all bestowed as a ni'mat from Allah. Qarun also possessed this kind of mentality, and Qarun is mentioned in the Quran. And the reality is that the foundation of the capitalist system is established on this same erroneous ideology. Now, what I have done over here is that excerpts from Islam, A Challenge to Religion. I was in a process of reformatting this book for publication in the West. And I came across these paragraphs, and I thought these succinctly explain what is noted in this verse. And to my pleasure as well, or to my joy, that I found this verse quoted by Allama Pervez in this book. Capitalism is based on two assumptions. The first assumption is that man has an inviolable right to the property that he has acquired. The second is that society can prosper only when it does not interfere with the economic activity of the individual. He argues that what he has earned through his own ability, that is, the capitalist argues on this account, skill and effort must be exclusively his own. Nobody can claim a share in it. He may, if he likes, give a part or the whole of it to another, but no one can force him to do so. He will be doing no wrong if he keeps to himself. And that's a very serious flaw in the minds of these people who control the capitalist system, that whatever they earn, because the system helps them to earn more, because that's the way it is organized. That is, the reward is for the capital, not for the work. So as a result, they start owning it, and they don't see the problems they create as a result of this hoarding of the wealth. This attitude is exemplified in Korah, that is Qarun, whose story is narrated in the Quran. When he was asked to give a part of his immense wealth to the needy and the poor, he replied exactly like the capitalist of today. Why should I? This is the result of my own capability. The Quran tells us that man commits a grave mistake if he believes that he owes his wealth exclusively to his own ability and effort. And then they should realize that where will that ability and effort go once they die? Because death decides everything. Next is question of human abilities. The main fallacy inherent in the capitalist argument is made evident when we look at the conditions on which the production of wealth depends. 4 factors which are stated below contribute to the production of wealth. These are very important. We should all try to remember them, because this is the basis on which we can argue with others and discuss with others and let them know that the system we have in the world of today, it will keep exploiting majority because it is based on wrong foundations. Man's physical and mental capacities, the education and training he has received, the opportunities available to him, and the last one is his industry, that is his own efforts and work. It is obvious that man can take credit for only the 4th factor, i.e. the work he puts in. His natural endowments are a gift of Allah, because every child who is born, he or she comes with that intellectual or that cognitive potentials which are given by Allah. He or she does not decide that I'm going to be very intelligent or I'm going to be less intelligent. He did not acquire them through his own efforts. He is indebted to his community for the education and training he has received. So once that child lands up, for example, in a poor house, then they have very limited opportunities as compared to somebody lands in, for example, a royal family or a very rich family. And so that makes the difference. And as students of the Quran, we have to keep these things in our mind all the time. And this needs a lot of training, a lot of reminding. Society also provides them with opportunities for producing wealth. So first 3 points, man's physical and mental capacities, gets it free. The education and training he has received is because of being born in somewhere in the world where there are better facilities, and because of the family. Again, it is not by choice. The opportunities available to him, again, are related to the system in which he is living, and amount of money, guidance, parents, all those factors come into it. The only thing of his own is his industry, that is his own efforts and work, of course, within the constraints in which he or she is born. And these are very important points. These take time to come to grips with. But we have to, if we want to progress towards the system of Deen. Next is accountability is linked to our deeds, no self-development. And very important, by just talking, we can't find our way into developing ourselves. It is all hot air. What we have to do is we have to do deeds. It follows that man can justly claim only that portion of the wealth he has produced, which is the outcome of the labor he has put in. The work he has performed entitles him to a share in the wealth produced and not to the whole of it. The Quran puts it very clearly, man shall have only that for which he strives. Laisa lil insana illa ma sa'a. If this principle is accepted, the point over here is that this exists. Even if we do not follow this principle, it does not mean that it does not exist. It exists in its own right. And acted upon in good faith, the conflict between workers and employers will disappear, and a serious menace to internal peace will be removed. The capitalist will willingly spend the major portion of his profits for the welfare of the community, and the workers will be able to live in comfort and security. This principle is challenged on the grounds that there are innate differences among men, and it is unfair to treat them as equals in respect of ability. Those who possess greater ability can justly claim a greater share in the national wealth. Next, deen can only be shaped through the hands of those who possess developed selves. The Quranic view is that the personal worth of man does not depend on his talent to do a thing, but on what he actually does. All men are equal in the sight of Allah, whatever may be the differences among them. Moreover, the argument of the capitalist had weight so long as it was believed that intellectual work was more valuable than manual work. We now believe in the spectrum of values. Any type of work is as valuable as any other, because it is through the mutual cooperation and doing the work that the whole society becomes happier and becomes free from fear and huzn, provided man puts his heart into it. Manual work can have as much value as intellectual work. Besides this, the differences among men bestow on each his unique individuality. However, different men may be in respect of intelligence. They can be equal in respect of personal worth, and that is important. It doesn't make any difference if one is more intelligent than the other, one is more educated than the other. Of course, that will be a state at the beginning of setting up a system of deen, but that does not remove their inherent personal worth as human beings. If each works conscientiously to the limit of his capacity, so it is in the interest of society that some men should possess more ability in a particular sphere than others. According to the Quran, the difference in ability amongst various individuals is for the purpose of division of labor and should not constitute a ground for creating inequality in society and meting out different treatment to different sets of men. The knowledge that men are unequal should not be allowed to induce us to relax our efforts to raise the general standard of living in the society. The Rabubiyat order is committed to provide the means for the development of each and every individual. It treats as sacred the right of every man to have full scope for his development. The worth of a human being needs to remain in focus. Division of labor is meant to ensure maximum production of wealth. It does not imply that the man who does manual work is inferior to the man who organizes the industry. No doubt, the work of one person may be more remunerative than that of another. The Quran takes the position that a person who earns more should not keep it all to himself, but should give the surplus to those who, through lack of ability or opportunity, cannot earn enough to satisfy their needs. So at a fundamental level, we as students of the Quran should understand these discrepancies and imbalances within the human society. That is the word of today. In the ideal society, emphasis would be on mutual help and not on individualism. And note here, as discussed previously, we need to keep in mind that the land in the world is made available free to humanity, and same goes for human intellect and abilities. We need to keep reminding ourselves about these fundamentals in the process of living this finite physical existence in this world. Now, I added this slide later on, and it is not included in one posted on Friday. Some points regarding human potentials and abilities. The Quran has emphasized this point for Momineen to know that their potentials and abilities are to be related back to Allah as His Fadl. We need to analyze this fact in more detail in order to incorporate it in ourselves. Whatever development we witness in the world, it is due to the application of the human intellect. For example, when some new discovery is made, this is the outcome of the intellectual efforts of individuals. The whole of research and development is based on the application of the human intellect and the manifestation of those latent potentials which, when given an opportunity, manifest to display their hidden worth. For example, in today's world, we see so much technology and the computer science, and of course now the AI is coming, and we see all these gadgets, aeroplanes, everything. We should keep in mind that all these potentials of discoveries were kept within us right at the time when human beings landed up on the land. That is, they appeared in the earth. And these were waiting to be manifested. So same way, we all have those potentials for the system of deen. So as and when the system of deen will come, all people who have those potentials and who are willing to bring out those potentials will realize it, that the life they have lived in the past was no good. This is the way to live our life. So there is an encouraging point over here to understand the ability trait of each of us, because these potentials are there. Whatever we are discovering in the world, those potentials are already there, and the only thing is that we are making use of them through our efforts, and of course through the opportunities provided by the society around us. And that takes us to this point, that, for example, in whole of Africa, if we keep them underdeveloped, see how much backward we are keeping ourselves, because so many human beings could come out with something new for the good of mankind. Similarly, whatever atrocities and tyrannies human beings unleashed in the world, those are those potentials which are there, and these human beings make the deliberate choice to commit all kinds of evils. And we can witness it on a daily basis in today's world. Allah asks us to examine everything in the human world carefully and thoughtfully, so that we can come to grips with the potentials and abilities kept within us. Without the guidance of Wahi, people will always relate these successes to their own achievements, without recognizing the fact that these are there for a purpose, and only the Quran can explain this reality to us. Human beings at their own cannot be attracted to this particular aspect which the Quran has laid bare before us, that human abilities are given by Allah. And as students of the Quran, we have to relate it back to Him all the time, because as companions working for the system of deen, we have to make it as part of ourselves. Let us go to the next verse, 1672. We need to grow out of the routine of our daily living. Wallahu ja'alakum min anfusikum azwajum wa ja'alakum min azwajikum banina wa hafadatan wa razaqakum min al-tayyibati afa bil batili yuminuna wa bi ni'matillahi hum yakfurun. As has been stated above, ponder again on what principle do you function in your home. Allah has created pairs from among you and has produced sons, that is progeny, for your wives. Then there are also such people who help you in carrying out household tasks. Then how do you distribute food and drink among all of them? Is it not under this principle that those who can earn do so with full effort, and then risk becomes distributed within the family according to the need of every individual? This is very important for us to understand, as the students of the Quran, that within a family structure, the least, the children are the ones who are most vulnerable and need maximum help, and every effort in a family is directed towards meeting the needs of those children. And if the same principle is applied to the mankind as a whole, then shouldn't we be doing the same? And this is what the Quran is asking us to reflect on. Our system of Rabubiyat desires that you consider the whole of mankind as one family, and the way in which you distribute work and risk within a family. Do this in the same way to the whole of humanity. But what people do is that instead of this correct and constructive ideology in human society, they adopt a wrong, destructive ideology, and in this way reject the bounties bestowed by Allah. Now, some further reflections on this verse. Note the addressees in this verse are the men who are at the helm of decision making. By mentioning progeny together with wives, the Quran has drawn our attention to the basic family structure in human society. It is continuing the same theme from the previous verse to take us to the issue of sustenance and its distribution. It then invites us to aim for that rizq, and we should keep in mind that rizq, according to the Quran, means that it must be sufficient, number one, and it should be made available at the time when it is needed, which is good in every respect. And this includes the way in which we organize earning it and then its distribution within the value system of the Quran. We need to relate these verses to the problems of imbalance and inequitable distribution across the world created by man in power. The same people who are extremely compassionate and kind towards their own families suddenly become heartless and tyrannical towards other human beings. Why is this? And we observe it. I remember reading one of the books by Tolstoy, And he says that all the people in power in Tsar's Russia, they all have families. They all love their children. But once they go out, they exploit others. Why do they do it? In the next part, by stating, Afabil batile yuminuna wa binematillahi hum yakfurun. They start to believe in batil, that is evil system, and thus display kufr towards the bounties of Allah, which are supposed to be shared among all and not hoarded by depriving others in the world. And this is the task of Momineen. And because there are no Momineen, there is no deen in the world. That is why nobody is reminding them. Of course, there are warners, but if we look at the way system is functioning today, nobody talks of the higher values of life. They are all busy looking into the matters as if the life will end with death. Next verse 1673, obedience to Allah means to work for deen. وَيَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ لَهُمْ رِزْقًا مِنَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ. It is obvious that when the means of risk and human abilities are bestowed by Allah, then the distribution of risk should also be according to the program defined by Him. But the state of people is such that they resort to obedience of non-Allah system and laws, even though those powers neither have any control over the means of risk in the universe, nor do they possess this ability, that they can bestow such potentials on anyone. Further reflections on this verse, there is a very important and a subtle point in this verse, and I will explain that. Continuing from the previous verse, the Quran here tells us in no uncertain terms that such behavior and conduct is equal to obeying other gods and not Allah's commands regarding Rabubiyat. This means that even if these people take the name of Allah and claim to be adherents, in practice they do not accept the distribution of the means of sustenance bestowed by Allah as per the Quranic injunctions. And we know that in the world of religion or madhab, the whole thing is not to take responsibility and not to hold oneself accountable. Next, the Quran has stated something which needs our profound attention, as it may seem not true. We see in the human world that it is human beings who control the means of sustenance everywhere. And when the Quran declares that no one other than Allah has the power, then uncertainty arises in our hearts, and we look for an explanation of such verses. It appears as if it is Allah who is doing this directly in the human world. The answer to that is, as noted in the earlier meanings, that the Jamaat-e-Momineen is asked to bring these within their control so that this statement of the Quran becomes haqq and reality. And that is the important point over here, that when Quran says that others obey other than Allah's system, that means Jamaat-e-Momineen is the one who should intervene and come into play and say that we will follow Allah's laws and we will not let others go against His laws. And that is the important point to understand, because without understanding that, it's very difficult to understand the meanings of this verse. As we already know, in the human world, it is through the hands of Momineen that Allah carries out the purpose of the creation of human beings. Hence, we need to relate it back to our own self and ask ourselves the question, what is in it for me? Few more aspects noted here. Let us go through it in steps. Firstly, the verse states that وَيَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ, obeying the commands of other than Allah has created all the problems faced by you. This is based on evidence. Do you want this state to end in your life? And that is something which I picked up and I said, wait a minute, this is what the Quran is telling us as students of the Quran, that if you do not obey Allah and obey others, min dunillah, then you will have the world the way you are living in 2023. And nothing will change in your world. You will keep getting exploited and you will never enjoy the true freedom which the Quran is giving you. So this needs pause and reflect. Then look at what is stated here in the Quran, that all means of rizq are placed within your reach, and guidance has been provided here in this book, which, if obeyed, then you will be able to place the control of all these means of sustenance back in the hand of Allah. So that is the important point which we have to accommodate in our cognition very deeply and keep reminding ourselves that nothing will change in the world until we understand what Quran is telling us and then, of course, staying together and proceeding forward, i.e., in the system of deen established on behalf of Allah. This means that if you leave these in the control of those who are not supposed to be owners of this, then this means that you do not accept the law of Allah in your word. Then continue to suffer in the fire of Jahannam. Bring the means of sustenance and their distribution within the control of the system of Rabubiyat and witness the change in the human world when Allah functions through the Momineen. We have seen that through these presentations of various verses, we have now developed and acquired that higher level of understanding where the outline of the system of deen is becoming fairly clear. So that is the point which the Quran is asking us, that gradually you will come to terms with the system of deen if you stick to this path. Now, next verse 1674, the Quran provides access to higher vistas of knowledge. فَلَا تَضْرِبُوا لِلَّهِ الْأَمْثَالَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Let us go through the meanings first. So that you do not try to prove your wrong economic system to be right through your self-concocted similes and concepts about Allah. For example, by saying that if this was indeed the will of Allah, then every human being has an equal right to share in rizq. Then he should have given equal abilities to all human beings. So instead of seeing the situation on ground, if one starts avoiding the responsibility, then these kind of arguments and thoughts arise in human minds. Because human beings can justify anything. What is going on, for example, in the Middle East, they can justify it. What went on in Ukraine, they can justify it. And we can see all the wars, human beings who are in power can justify it because they, by virtue of the power they have accumulated, they can justify it because there is no Momineen to stand up against them. The difference in the ability to earn rizq means that there is a differentiation in the right to possess rizq. Someone can be poor and another can be prosperous. Do not establish these kinds of concepts about Allah. He knows why the difference in abilities is kept in place and why it is essential to have the principle of according to need in the matter of the right to possess rizq. You are not aware of the reality and reason behind these matters. That is why you raise objections to these. Just pay attention to this. Inna Allah ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun, and we will go through its details. Further reflections. We can witness the interconnectedness of the verses of the Quran when we reflect on these in light of the various aspects of the human psyche, and this helps our education and training regarding those concealed thoughts which shape human systems. Here it is said that do not invent validations to justify whatever wrongs you do in your world, thinking there is no accountability. And it's very important for us as students of the Quran that we validate every thought which comes to our mind. In fact, we should only allow those thoughts which are validated by the Quran to go forward. The others should be eliminated. And this is part of the process of our self-development. There is nothing hidden from Allah and also from the Momineen who have become educated and trained through the medium of the Quran. Since they are human beings, and they can figure out through the knowledge provided by us all the secret workings and machinations of all Iblis' systems. See how Allah helps us. Even on the finest, very, very minor points which we might ignore in our normal life, the Quran brings it out before us so that we are not mistaken and we do not suffer because of absence of knowledge. The whole purpose of human creation is to bring out the best from all those latent potentials which Allah has kept in the constitution of man. What do Momineen need to do on this highway of life? They should gain as much knowledge as possible using the Quran as well as the knowledge which the human intellect has acquired in their era. Because then we cannot know that where human beings are at any point in time, where this system is, what kind of mentality is working behind that system. For example, the capitalist system or the communist system or the socialist system. So these are important points to which the Quran is drawing our attention. And then make all this acquired understanding as a part of their self. Then keep assessing their self using the criteria given in the Quran. Now continuing with this verse, as this developed self keeps manifesting various facets of its continuing development, for example, through divine attributes, learning the application of the permanent values and the relative values of the man-devised systems, carrying out solid deeds, a desire will emerge to work with other similar selves to advance forward. Now, this is an important point. A desire will emerge to work with other similar selves to advance forward. We need to be aware of it, that how did the desire come in our own hearts, in our own minds to work for this system? And using that criteria, because that's something empirical. If I know that how did I come to the Quran and how did the guidance of the Quran appeal to me, for example, by reading the books of Allama Pervez, and what exactly influenced my thought process, and that will help us to also find out about others. Part of this self-development process is that despite every challenge presented by the Iblisi system, they will never give up. And this takes time. This patience and steadfastness on which the Quran puts so much emphasis, we should always keep in mind and say to ourselves, I will never give up. I will never give up. They will never become distracted and will never become upset due to the criminal events of the world. And the thought should also come to our mind that the life goes beyond death. This is not the end in itself. I don't want to be a living dead in this world. I want to be alive all the time. And now, of course, we do not have a reason because we got so much material and, of course, this platform as well. So that is important to keep in mind all the time, that this physical life will end one day. And we can see human beings dying right, left, and center. And just see what is happening in Middle East. One day, thousands of these people were alive, and now they are gone. They're gone forever as far as this life is concerned. This will provide strength with the fact that the law of requital of Allah is functioning, as the wrong outcomes of evil deeds will keep appearing. So the thing which we should keep in mind as students of the Quran is stick with it and then check it as well, validate it, whether this is a better path than the path I was following previously. Another important point implicit in this verse, in this part of the verse, is Inna Allaha ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. If we read this verse without paying much reflection, then it appears that Allah knows and you do not know. Now, that doesn't make any move within us. That doesn't provoke us to think further. Whereas there is a lot implicit in this verse, is that what Allah knows and which has not yet fallen in your purview, it will become accessible. And that is what the Quran is telling us. Inna Allah ya'lamu, that Allah knows a lot. We know that how much Allah knows. And this knowledge is becoming accessible to us as we are going through the Quran and also studying the word around us. Just do not give up. We have to create that desire, that motivation, that incentive within us. What else is there? Let me surprise myself by learning more. Merely understanding this important point is a sign of how we keep enhancing the expanse of our consciousness, where things start to become visible which were hidden previously. The usual translation reads, invent no similitudes for Allah knows and you know not. Now, that is actually, this translation is putting a restriction on us, that Allah knows it, and since you cannot know it, just give up and move on. And these translations are the ones which are actually contributing to misguidance of human beings as well. And that is why it is important that we point it out to others, that they should read the books by Allama Pervez, and they should also go through some of these slides which we have shared with each other. This translation blocks the path of any further desire to acquire knowledge. Our striving has led us to another height on this path. And we can appreciate that because as with the passing time and as we are more delving into various parts of the Quran, the expanse of our intellectual horizon is expanding. Next verse, 1675, provision of balanced rizq will lead to hamd of Allah in the world. Daraballahu matalan abdan mamlukan la yakdiru ala shay'in wa man razaqnahu minna rizqan hasanan fahuwa yunfiqu minhu sirran wa jahran hal yastauna alhamdulillah bal aksaruhum la ya'lamun. After going through this verse and its meanings, we can see that how wrongly people use this term of alhamdulillah. If you wish to hear right similes, then listen. A person is someone's slave, and that too a slave who has been bought. Hence, he is merely a constrained being. He simply has no choice in anything. The other individual is one to whom we have provided a good means of sustenance, and using his choice and intent, he makes it available openly and secretly for the Rabubiyat of others. Say, can these two be equal? Now just think that if all human beings had been given equal abilities, then man would have been constrained like the parts of a machine. He would no longer have been possessor of choice and intent. This system would not have been suitable for what man is. It was the demand of his eminence as a human being that there should be such a system so that everyone works according to their respective abilities, and the one who earns more, he should willingly, through his own choice and intent, fulfill the deficiency of others from his excess earnings. And that is a very important point. The more we pay attention to that, the more it expands in front of us. Because the Quran says that a society of deen is the one where each one is worried about others and is least concerned about himself. And with that kind of outlook, see how beautiful that society and the human relations can be. And the one whose deficiency he fulfills, he should neither consider it as an ihsan on himself, nor should he shirk work a result of this. This is the system of Allah, which is deserving of every aspect of appreciation and admiration. And this is where then we will be able to say, Alhamdulillah. But most people who look at these things superficially or have vested interests do not understand this reality. 1675, we need to learn from signs in the human world. Continuing from previous verses, here the Quran has noted a parable by comparing the case of two different human psyches. Firstly, it has asked us to reflect on the state of cognitive development of a man who is under the laws and directions of another human being who is exactly like him and has no right to do this legally as per the Mashiach of Allah. A few points of interest to which the Quran is drawing our attention. By being under the direction of another human being, our potentials only develop to the extent that person or system allows us. And that is very important. If we conform to the system of today, then our potentials which we have, according to the Quran, those will never ever be able to manifest, and we will die with those potentials unexplored. And the best one can become is to be like him or her as he or she is the model. This is the situation in which we find human beings under man-made systems. If we look around, the criterion for success is defined by some rich man whose riches become the goal in life. And it's very easy. If we go around and see people, for example, who are working on shop floor, and people who are, for example, if we go to deprived areas, even in the West, we see human beings over there and then see that how they are living and what aim and purpose they have in life. And then look at the Quran and say that all these people have never ever been even told that there is a better way of living life. The Quran tells us clearly and unambiguously that no man has the right to rule another man and to devise laws outside the remit of the permanent values given by Allah. And we know about this verse, Ma kana li basharin an yutiyahu Allahu al-kitaba wal hukma wal nubuwata summa yaqulu lin-nasi kunu ibadan li min dunillah. No human being, even the Nabi who is given the book and hikmat, has the authority to ask for obedience to himself or obedience to his laws. This single verse nullifies all the literature which people consult outside the Quran, like these books of ahadith. This one verse, if we understand it properly, it tells us our true worth. This right only belongs to Allah. Further reflections on this verse. Then the Quran mentions the outlook and vision acquired by him by choice of another individual who shares with us that he has concern for humanity, and he makes the excess wealth available for fellow human beings because he has understood the way of Allah. How did he understand it? Because over here the Quran is comparing the two from human point of view as human beings possessing choice and intent. He is not satisfied with the corrupt system in which he lives, and Wahi guided him towards Iman, and having come to grips with its finer details, he followed its guidance. For example, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. I've taken this verse from Surah Al-Baqarah. The parable of those who keep their possessions freely available in order to be congruent with the will of Allah and to strengthen their selves. He understood the purpose of salih deeds. It's very important that in these verses, and there are a number of verses on this aspect in Surah Al-Baqarah, around this 265, that the whole point is not helping others. The whole point is to make our own self stronger so that we can get the help of Allah, so that we are of some use to humanity in terms of moving progress towards the Quran, and of course coming together as a Jamaat, as a group, so that we are making some difference in the world to bring some change. And that is the whole point. If we get lost in these charitable things, then essentially we have missed the point of self-development. And that is very important. We should keep it in mind. And I will expand on this aspect in our future presentations. Here an important point is noted of razaqnahu minna rizqan hasanan, recognizing importance of the provision of balanced rizq where it is made available without causing any hurt and to meet needs adequately and in a timely manner. And of course, this is the responsibility of the system, but we have to understand it individually as well, because it is individuals who come together and then they go towards the system of deen. The next part reflects on the state of development of the human psyche under the guidance of Allah. Another important aspect of the human psyche noted here by stating, yunfiku minhu sirram wa jahran. That is, whether they make it sirran, that is, whether they do it in a concealed way. There could be reasons for doing that. For example, if individual to individual somebody is helping, then of course they would like to avoid any hurt of feelings of self-respect and of course dignity. But wajahran is when the system is established or some kind of joint effort is made, then of course it has to be manifested. Making it available privately and publicly, why does Allah emphasize this important aspect? Expanding it further, for example, in another verse, Quran says, "Allazina yunfikuna amwalahum fi sabilillahi summa la yutbi'una ma anfaqu manna wala azan lahum ajruhum inda rabbihim wala khawfun alayhim wala hum yahzanun." Those who make their substance available in the cause of Allah and follow not their gifts with reminder or generosity or with hurt, for them there is a reward with their Rabb will lead to deen. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they have huzn. I've quoted this translation. Actually, there is a lot more in terms of its interpretation in this verse, and maybe we'll deal with it in more detail at some other time. But what Quran is saying is over here that try to understand the first part, because if you understand the first part, particularly at this point in time in our own education and training, then you will understand that how this first part will eliminate khawf and huzn in your society. Because khawf and huzn only comes because of not knowing the cause for it. For example, if somebody has a disease and that disease is still not manifested itself, we do not know if it exists, but only symptoms are there, then we have to treat it. We have to get some kind of evidence for that. We have to get the tests for that. And once that becomes clear, then that fear goes away and then one can treat it. Because ignorance and not knowing about something in itself creates fear and uncertainty. It is an extremely powerful statement of the Quran with regard to enhancing comprehension of the system of deen and the process of acquiring that self which is needed for striving on the path of Allah. As we know, Allah wishes us to bring about a change in our psyche, as through this our outer world will change. Because unless our inner world changes, outer world cannot change. And we know it about it, but it's good to remind ourselves. Fear and huzn are two important negative outcomes of the man-made systems, and we can experience this in today's world, in 2023. Here the Quran is revealing an important recipe for the treatment of this fear and huzn through first understanding the capitalist system and its gross injustices, and secondly asking us to acquire Iman as noted in verse 2, 177, and then motivating us to make the means available for the use of others in order to acquire that psyche which will lead to success on this path. Now we go to the last verse for today's talk, 1676. Momineen need to aim for helping to transform the human world. And this should stay as our focus all the time at the back of our mind, even if it looks an impossible task, never mind. That should stay at the back of our mind, that we have to work together to transform the world. And that creates that kind of a patience and resoluteness within us that doesn't matter what happens in the outer world, we will keep striving on this path. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا رَجُلَيْنِ أَحَدُهُمَا أَبْكَمُ لَا يَقْدِرُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ كُلُّ عَلَى مَوْلَهُ أَيْنَمَا يُوَجِّهُ لَا يَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي هُوَ وَمَنْ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَهُوَ عَلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. Or, for example, this simile described by Allah that there are two individuals, one among them is such that he is deprived of intellect and reasoning. He has no control over anything. We should keep it in mind that what Quran is stating over here is from human systems which are wrongly established. Even for his own needs, he is a burden on his master. Wherever his master sends him, he does not bring back any good news. He is unable to do anything right. He is helpless and constrained. He has neither the ability to cause anyone any harm nor the power to provide any benefit. And of course, this is in relation to unguided people. And this is what Wahi does. Wahi takes out all these limitations and weaknesses, and we overcome them and create tremendous strength within ourselves. Can this individual be like that individual who keeps treading on the balanced path of life of his own accord and carries out every decision of his using his choice and intent by keeping the requirements of justice in front of him? This is the difference between man being constrained and man possessing choice and intent. Great verse. Finally, some further reflections. An interesting example is given by Allah here, which we can relate to in the world in which we live. An individual, even a nation, who is under the control of another human being, either willingly or unwillingly, cannot use his choice and intent freely. And in most cases, he is not even fully conscious of possessing these attributes. Because not being conscious means that literally one is dead. One is just following it blindly without knowing that what is going on in their life. For example, if he's religious-minded, he thinks all is already decided about his future. And this is a tremendous backwardness and tremendous weakness in human beings, because if this life was going to continue without death, then we could ignore it, that at some point we will learn it. The issue is that this is the only life we have, and our future life is predicated on what we do over here. And of course, this life cannot even get better unless we come to the Quran. Being a slave, he is being controlled by his master, the few at the top. Hierarchy of power in the human world adds to layers of slavery from top to bottom. And we can see that. Under the system of Deen, we should remember that it will be a very flat structure. Allah at the top and Momineen, who are thoroughly grounded in the Quran, they are the ones who are controlling it, but their standard of living will be exactly the same as the common man in the street. Here, the Quran has painted a very vivid picture of the state of psyche of human beings who are subjugated and do not have the opportunity to even become fully conscious of their ability to make choices. Another point which has come to my mind just to remind ourselves is that under the system of Deen, two very important facts we should keep in mind. Allah as a model and the life of the hereafter. Because life of the hereafter, its concept brings in the accountability. And because of that accountability and becoming conscious of it, the purpose of life changes. We do not get bogged down in the physical conveniences of this life, which are important. Under the system of Deen, there will be extensive conveniences of life, but people will live life at a very high rational level of their cognitive development, at which they will be fully conscious of Allah as a model, His attributes, and they will manifest those. And then they will also all the time know that the life will not end with death. So that desperation for successes in the physical world will be taken out. And of course, all of them will not be like that. But as we have seen, even in the capitalist system, that most human beings just conform to the system. As students of the Quran, we need to reflect profoundly on the finer aspects of this verse. Then the Quran takes us to the lofty and eminent heights of being a Momin and the associated benefits of possessing a developed psyche. Through this comparison, it is inviting us to figure out all the steps necessary to help bring these human beings and future generations trapped in the exploited system to the level of being human, and then putting before them the choice of Quranic guidance, that is Sirat-e-Mustaqim. And with that, we come to the end of our today's presentation. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen. Thank you once again. By Suhaib Qureshi, who